The distress beacon flickered weakly against the violet sky of Fenris-7, a frozen moon at the edge of charted space. Colony ship Prometheus had crashed 3 days ago, scattering debris across 50 kilometers of ice-locked wilderness. The emergency teams had swept the crash site methodically, recovering survivors, cataloging the dead, marking sectors as cleared. They missed Grid 47 Delta entirely. They didn't hear the crying. 6-year-old Thomas Reeves huddled in the crumpled remains of an escape pod, wrapped in thermal blankets that were losing their charge. His mother had strapped him in during the final descent, had whispered that everything would be okay, had kissed his forehead one last time before the impact tore them apart. Now he was alone. The pod's emergency rations were gone. The heating element had failed. The cold was unlike anything Earth's children were meant to endure. A savage, gnawing cold that turned breath to crystals and made fingers too numb to move. He'd stopped crying hours ago. Now he just shivered, making small whimpering sounds that escaped through chattering teeth. The violet sky was darkening toward the long night that would last for weeks on this tidally locked moon. Thomas didn't understand planetary rotation or survival odds. He only understood that he was cold and hungry, and his mother wasn't coming back. That's when he heard the howls. They started distant, echoing across the ice fields. Sounds that were wolf-like but wrong, too deep, with harmonics that seemed to vibrate in the chest rather than just reach the ears. Thomas had seen wolves in his educational holos back on Earth. Apex predators. Dangerous. The colonial briefing had mentioned Fenris-7's native predators in passing. Pack hunters, highly intelligent, territorial. Avoid at all costs. The howls grew closer. Through the pod's cracked viewport, Thomas saw them materializing from the blue-white landscape like shadows gaining substance. They were massive, each easily twice the size of a Terran gray wolf, with 6 legs instead of 4, bodies rippling with dense muscle beneath fur that seemed to shift colors with the ambient light. Their eyes glowed a soft amber in the gathering darkness, reflecting light that wasn't there. 7 of them moving in formation surrounding the pod. The Alpha approached first. It was a magnificent creature, fur ranging from silver to deep blue-black, with a ruff of white around its neck that looked almost ceremonial. Scars marked its muzzle, badges of survival in this harsh world. It pressed its nose against the viewport, breath fogging the cracked plasteel. Those amber eyes locked with Thomas's brown ones. The boy stopped whimpering. Something in that gaze wasn't the mindless hunger he'd expected. There was intelligence there. Assessment. Something almost curious. The Alpha made a sound. Not a growl, but something between a rumble and a chirp, glancing back at the pack. 3 others approached. One was sleeker, darker, moving with a feminine grace. 2 were younger, possibly yearlings, with the gangly energy of adolescence. They sniffed at the pod's base, at the seams where human scent leaked out into the alien air. Thomas should have been terrified. Every human instinct, every lesson about dangerous animals, every warning from the colonial briefing should have had him paralyzed with fear. But he was 6 years old and he'd been alone for so long, and there was something in the way the Alpha tilted its head, the same way his mother used to when she was trying to understand him, that made him reach out. His small hand pressed against the viewport from the inside, matching where the Alpha's nose touched from the outside. The pod's door had been jammed since the crash, but the pack made short work of it. The Alpha used its powerful jaws to grip the twisted metal, and 2 others added their strength. The door shrieked open, and Arctic air flooded in. Thomas gasped as the cold hit him like a physical force. This was it. This was how it would end. Not in fire during the crash, not from exposure, but in the jaws of an alien predator. But the Alpha didn't attack. Instead, it lowered its massive head and gently, impossibly gently, gripped the back of Thomas's thermal suit in its teeth. The boy went rigid as he was lifted from the pod like a mother cat carrying a kitten. The Alpha carried him a few meters away from the wreckage and set him down on a patch of compressed snow. Then it laid down beside him, its massive body curling around the small human child like a living furnace. The others followed suit, creating a barrier of fur and warmth around the freezing boy. Thomas stopped shaking. The cold retreated. And for the first time since the crash, he felt something impossible. Safe. The wolves of Fenris-7 operated on instincts humanity was only beginning to understand. They recognized helplessness. They understood survival. And they knew, somehow, that this small creature was a juvenile, young, vulnerable, separated from its pack. That triggered something primal in them, something that transcended species boundaries. The alpha, whom Thomas would eventually come to call Silverback in his mind, made the decision that would change everything. The strange two-legged pup would come with them. The pack would provide. The pack would protect. This was the way. As violet darkness settled over the ice fields, the pack began to move. Silverback nudged Thomas to his feet with a massive snout. When the boy stumbled on numb legs, unable to stand, the alpha simply laid down and maneuvered until Thomas was draped across his broad back, small fingers tangled in thick fur. The other wolves formed up, 3 ahead, 3 behind, moving in a pattern that shielded Thomas from the bitter wind that swept across the frozen expanse. They traveled for hours through a landscape of blue ice and black stone, crossing crevasses that would have swallowed Thomas whole, navigating by landmarks only they could recognize. The boy drifted in and out of consciousness, hypothermia still threatening despite the wolves' warmth. Every time he started to slip sideways, Silverback would adjust, keeping him secure. The dark female, Shadow, Thomas's exhausted mind named her, would surge alongside and add her body heat, pressing close. The den was carved into the base of a massive glacier, a network of ice caves smoothed by generations of occupation. Bioluminescent lichen clung to the walls, casting everything in a soft blue-green glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. The temperature inside was still well below freezing by human standards, but it was a paradise compared to the exposed surface. The wind couldn't reach here. The cold couldn't steal life quite so aggressively. Silverback deposited Thomas on a bed of dried vegetation that the pack had gathered, fibrous tundra plants that grew in brief thermal zones near geothermal vents. The entire pack crowded into the den, adults settling into a protective circle with Thomas at the center. The 2 yearlings, Quickfoot and Bright Eye, his mind supplied, desperate to name these creatures who'd saved him, pressed against his sides, becoming living blankets. Then came the most surprising moment. Shadow approached with something in her jaws, dropping it carefully beside Thomas. It was meat, raw, still steaming slightly in the cold air. Part of a kill from earlier that day, some native prey species that looked like a cross between a seal and an armored beetle. Thomas stared at it, his empty stomach churning with conflict. He'd never eaten raw meat. The texture, the blood, the reality of it made his civilized upbringing rebel. But hunger was a powerful teacher. And some deep part of him, the ancient human who'd survived ice ages and hunted mammoths, recognized sustenance when he saw it. His first bite was hesitant, disgusting, almost impossible to swallow. But it was food. It was survival. By the 3rd bite, his body's desperate need overrode his disgust. He ate. The wolves watched with those intelligent amber eyes, making sounds among themselves. Not quite language, but definitely communication. They were discussing him, Thomas realized. Deciding what to do with this strange pup who couldn't hunt, couldn't run properly, couldn't even keep himself warm. A liability by any practical measure. But pack was pack. That was the law of Fenris-7. Once accepted, you were protected. Federal taught. The alpha's decision stood. As Thomas finished eating, his body finally warm for the first time in days, his stomach full of alien protein, exhaustion crashed over him like a wave. He curled into a ball, and Silverback moved closer, draping a massive paw across him. Shadow laid her head near his, her breath steady and warm. The yearlings pressed tighter. Thomas fell asleep surrounded by predators who'd become protectors, alien wolves who'd chosen to save a human child. He didn't dream of the crash. He didn't dream of his mother's final moments. He dreamed of running across ice fields on 6 legs, of howling at violet skies, of belonging to something wild and pure and unbreakable. He dreamed of being part of a pack. Days became weeks. Weeks became something Thomas stopped counting. Time moved differently in the pack, measured in hunts and sleeps, in the rotation of Fenris-7's long days and longer nights, in the slow healing of frostbitten fingers and the gradual strengthening of a body pushed beyond its limits. Thomas learned to survive in ways no human child should have needed to learn. The pack taught him through demonstration, through patience that seemed infinite. When Silverback went hunting, Thomas followed, struggling through snow that came up to his chest, falling dozens of times until he learned to move with the pack's rhythm, to step where they stepped, to read the ice for weak spots. He watched them hunt the armored seals that basked on thermal vents. The pack moved like water, like smoke, encircling prey with perfect coordination. Silverback would signal with ear movements, tail positions, subtle shifts in posture that Thomas slowly learned to read. Shadow would flush prey toward waiting jaws. The yearlings would block escape routes. Every wolf had a role. Every movement had purpose. Thomas couldn't participate in the kills. His soft human body was too slow, too weak, too vulnerable, but the pack found a role for him anyway. He became the watcher, the one who stayed at safe distances and made warning sounds when other predators approached. His human voice, so different from wolf howls, proved useful for startling rival packs or alerting his family to dangers they hadn't scented yet. The cold stopped being an enemy. His body adapted in ways the colony's doctors would have found fascinating. His metabolism shifting, his circulation improving, his tolerance for temperature extremes expanding beyond normal human parameters. Or perhaps it was simpler than that. Perhaps survival was always about what you could endure rather than what you thought you could endure. Language evolved between them. Thomas couldn't howl properly. His human vocal cords weren't designed for it, but he learned to make approximations. Low rumbles for contentment, sharp barks for danger, whines for need. The wolves, in turn, learned to interpret his strange sounds, his gestures, his very human body language. Silverback would tilt his head when Thomas spoke actual words, as if trying to understand the complex sounds, occasionally mimicking them in ways that sounded almost like speech filtered through alien vocal anatomy. The breakthrough came during Thomas's third month with the pack. They were returning from a successful hunt, all bellies full, moving through a canyon of blue ice. Silverback stopped suddenly, ears swiveling. The pack froze. Thomas, walking near Shadow, froze too. Then he heard it, the rumble of ice shifting, the precursor to a collapse that would bury them all. "Move!" Thomas shouted, pointing frantically toward the canyon's exit. The pack didn't understand the word, but they understood the urgency, the fear in his voice, the direction of his gesture. Silverback barked a command and they ran, six-legged shapes blurring across ice with Thomas sprinting between them, his two legs pumping desperately. Behind them, a house-sized section of ice wall detached and crashed down, filling the canyon with deadly debris. They made it out seconds ahead of destruction. The pack circled Thomas, sniffing him anxiously, checking for injury. Silverback approached and did something he'd never done before. He pressed his massive forehead against Thomas's much smaller one, a gesture of acknowledgement, of respect. The strange pup had proven his worth. He'd saved the pack. That night, back in the den, something shifted. The wolves no longer treated Thomas as a helpless juvenile to be protected and tolerated. They treated him as pack, as family. Bright Eye started grooming Thomas's hair the way he would a littermate's fur. Quickfoot invited him to play wrestle, gentle enough not to hurt the fragile human but genuine in his affection. Shadow began teaching him which plants were edible, which ice formations held drinking water, which territories were safe and which belonged to rival packs. Thomas was becoming something unprecedented, a human raised by alien wolves. Not tamed, not domesticated, but wild, feral, adapted, and more alive than most humans in their climate-controlled habitats could imagine. The rival pack arrived during the height of winter, when Fenris-7's surface became a frozen hell that killed anything caught unprepared. They came from the southern glaciers, 8 wolves, all battle-scarred, led by a massive alpha with a torn ear and eyes like frozen amber. Their territory was failing, prey growing scarce, and they needed new hunting grounds. Silverback's territory was rich, well-positioned near thermal vents that attracted prey even in the worst weather. This meant war. Thomas first saw them from a ridge overlooking the pack's primary hunting ground. He'd climbed up with Bright Eye to scout for seal colonies, and they'd spotted the intruders marking boundaries, deliberately scent marking over Silverback's territorial claims. It was a direct challenge, impossible to ignore. Bright Eyes bristled, a growl rumbling from deep in his chest. Thomas felt his own muscles tense, his human mind recognizing the threat even as his body prepared for fight or flight. They raced back to the den, Bright Eye's longer legs easily outdistancing Thomas's desperate sprint. By the time Thomas arrived, Silverback had already gathered the pack. The alpha's posture radiated controlled aggression, ears forward, tail raised, every muscle coiled like a spring. Shadow-paced, agitated. The yearlings picked up on the tension, moving skittishly. The confrontation happened at twilight, on a flat expanse of ice that served as neutral ground. Both packs approached slowly, deliberately, showing strength without rushing to violence. This was ritual as much as combat, a chance for posturing, for displays of dominance that might resolve the conflict without bloodshed. Silverback ordered Thomas to stay back with the yearlings, but the boy could see everything from their position behind an ice ridge. The two alphas met in the center, circling each other, vocalizing in ways that made Thomas's chest vibrate even at distance. This was dominance display on a scale humans rarely witnessed, pure, primal, and terrifying. The torn-eared alpha lunged first. What followed was chaos. Teeth and claws and massive bodies colliding with impacts that echoed across the ice fields. Both packs surged forward. Shadow met a scarred female in mid-leap, their collision sending up a spray of ice crystals. The other wolves paired off, snarling and snapping, testing each other's strength. Silverback was magnificent in combat, larger than his opponent, faster than his bulk suggested, fighting with the experience of years. But the torn-eared alpha was younger, desperate, and had the reckless energy of a wolf with nothing to lose. They broke apart, circled, crashed together again. Blood stained the ice, from whose wounds Thomas couldn't tell. Then Thomas saw it. Two wolves from the rival pack had broken from the main fight and were circling toward the yearling's position. Toward him, they'd identified the weakness in Silverback's pack, the strange, vulnerable pup. Kill him, and Silverback's pack was psychologically broken. It was tactical, ruthless, and entirely instinctive. Bright Eye saw them too. He stepped in front of Thomas, hackles raised, making himself a barrier between the human child and the approaching threat. But he was young, inexperienced, facing two adult wolves. This was going to end badly. Something happened to Thomas in that moment. Something primal clicked into place. He'd spent months watching the pack hunt, watching them fight, watching them survive. He'd learned their tactics, their feints, their patterns. And he had one advantage they didn't: human hands. Tool use, problem solving. He grabbed a piece of broken ice, jagged and sharp as a knife, and as the first rival wolf leaped at Bright Eye, Thomas lunged forward with a scream that was part human war cry, part wolf's defensive snarl. The ice shard caught the attacking wolf across the shoulder. Not a killing blow, but shocking, painful, completely unexpected. The wolf yelped and twisted away. The second wolf hesitated. This tiny creature had just wounded a full-grown pack member. What was it? The moment of confusion was all Bright Eye needed. He crashed into the second wolf with the full weight of his adolescent body, teeth finding purchase on a haunch. Across the battlefield, Silverback heard Thomas's scream. He saw the threat to his pup, and something changed in the alpha's eyes. With a roar that seemed to shake the ice itself, he drove forward with renewed fury, forcing the torn-eared alpha back, bleeding and overwhelmed. The rival pack broke. 9 months after the crash, the Colonial Rescue Service finally returned to Fenris-7. New equipment, new personnel, a renewed search effort funded by families who refused to believe all hope was lost. They deployed thermal drones, seismic sensors, long-range scanners. They would sweep every grid, leave no stone unturned, no possibility unexplored. That's how they found the anomaly in Grid 47 Delta. A thermal signature that was humanoid but wrong, moving with a pack of large predators, exhibiting behavior patterns that made no sense for a survivor. They deployed a recon team immediately. Captain Elena Rhodes led the team personally. She'd lost her own daughter in the crash, 7 years old, never recovered, presumed dead in the initial impact zone. This rescue mission wasn't just professional for her. It was personal. It was penance. They found Thomas on the hunting grounds, staying near Bright Eye while the rest of the pack pursued a seal colony. The boy was barely recognizable as human. His colonial jumpsuit had long since deteriorated, replaced by crude wrappings of animal hide that Shadow had helped him secure. His hair was long, tangled, filled with ice crystals. His skin was darkened by cold exposure, cracked and weathered beyond his years. He moved on all fours as often as upright, conserving heat, moving efficiently across terrain that would have crippled normal humans. When the recon team appeared in their bright orange survival suits, Thomas's first instinct wasn't relief. It was fear. Humans meant the colony. The colony meant the crash. The crash meant his mother's death, meant loss, meant pain. These were invaders in his territory, threats to his pack. He vocalized not words, but a warning cry that was half human, half wolf. Bright Eye appeared beside him instantly, fur bristling, positioned between Thomas and the approaching humans. Within seconds, the entire pack materialized from the ice fields, summoned by their young member's distress call. 7 alien wolves surrounded the boy, hackles raised, growling in harmonics that made the humans' gear vibrate. Jesus Christ, one of the soldiers breathed. They're protecting him. Captain Rhodes stepped forward slowly, removing her helmet so Thomas could see her face. She recognized him from the passenger manifest. Thomas Reeves, 6 years old, son of Dr. Sarah Reeves, listed as deceased. But he was alive. Against all probability, impossibility, he was alive. Thomas, she said softly. Thomas Reeves, we're here to take you home. You're safe now. The boy tilted his head, the gesture pure wolf. Home? The word meant nothing to him anymore. Home was the den. Home was the pack. Home was Silverback's protective presence and Shadow's patient teaching and the yearling's playful affection. Don't want to go, Thomas said, his human speech rusty, awkward after months of disuse. Pack. My pack. Rhodes felt something break inside her chest. This child, this impossible survivor, had bonded with predators, had become one of them. Taking him from the pack might save his body but destroy his soul. But leaving him here meant condemning him to a life of savagery, meant giving up on his humanity, meant admitting that civilization couldn't reclaim one of its own. Silverback made the decision. The Alpha approached Rhodes directly, ignoring the weapons trained on him, showing no fear of these strange two-legged creatures. He looked at her with those intelligent amber eyes, then at Thomas, then back to her. He gently gripped Thomas's hide wrappings in his teeth and pulled the boy toward the humans. A gesture of release, of understanding. The pack didn't want to lose their pup, but they recognized that he was different, that he belonged with his own kind, that denying him that connection would be its own cruelty. Silverback was returning Thomas to his birth pack, the way he would want someone to return a lost wolf pup to its original family. Thomas broke. He wrapped his arms around Silverback's massive neck, sobbing words the wolf couldn't understand but feeling the wolf absolutely comprehended. Goodbye. Thank you. I love you. Shadow pressed close, whining softly. The yearlings touched their noses to his hands. The rescue team moved in carefully, gently separating boy from wolves. Thomas didn't resist, but he didn't stop watching his pack as they carried him away. And the wolves watched back, howling their farewell across the ice fields. A sound of loss, of love, of family. 3 years later, Thomas Reeves stood at the observation deck of Colony Station Prometheus 2, looking down at Fenris-7's frozen surface. He was 9 years old now, had relearned human speech, had undergone therapy and medical treatment and countless interviews. Scientists called him the Wolf Boy of Fenris, studied his adaptations, marveled at his survival. Therapists tried to reintegrate him into human society, with mixed results. But Thomas never forgot, and he never stopped listening for howls that couldn't reach this far into space. He changed the colony's policy regarding Fenris-7's native wildlife. His testimony, passionate, detailed, backed by 9 months of lived experience, had convinced the Colonial Council to declare the moon's wolf populations protected. No hunting, no territorial expansion into their ranges, no interference except for scientific observation. More than that, he'd changed humanity's understanding of what survival meant. Not domination, not conquest, but adaptation, cooperation, the recognition that intelligence and compassion existed in forms we didn't expect, in creatures we'd labeled as mere predators. Sometimes, late at night, Thomas would access the long-range observation feeds. He'd found Silverback's pack again, tracked them across their territory. They'd thrived. The yearlings were full adults now. Bright Eye had become beta. Shadow still hunted with the grace that had taught Thomas so much. And Silverback, aging but still powerful, still led his family across the ice fields with wisdom earned through years of survival. Thomas pressed his hand against the viewport, the same gesture he'd made that first day when a massive predator had chosen not to kill but to save. He'd been adopted by wolves, raised by them, loved by them, and though he wore human clothes now, spoke human language, lived in human spaces, part of him would always run across frozen wastelands on borrowed legs, would always hear the pack's call in his dreams. The wolves of Fenris-7 had taught humanity the most important lesson: that civilization wasn't defined by technology or cities or conquering hostile worlds. It was defined by the capacity to care for the vulnerable, to protect the helpless, to choose compassion when cruelty was easier. And sometimes, if the wind was right and the observation feed's audio was turned up high enough, Thomas could swear he heard them howling, calling for their lost pup, remembering the human who became wolf, honoring the bond that transcended species and survival itself. If you loved this story of survival and unlikely family, check out our next video about the human who taught an entire alien civilization what never give up really means. You won't believe what happens when humanity's stubbornness meets an empire that's never known defeat. Click the video appearing on your screen now.